is a good trouble. You'll understand, if you don't already, why that's a line associated with John Lewis. If you see at the bottom of the slide, it says ZTL, which means Zecher Tzadik Livracha. May this righteous man, may his life indeed be a blessing to all of us. So again, welcome tonight, and I hope you enjoy some of my personal reflections, as well as a little bit of a general statement and research that I did with this relationship to the Jewish community. Actually, tonight I want to start with a quote from Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who once said, "The ultimate measure of a person is not where he or she stands in moments of comfort and convenience, but where he or she stands at times of challenge and controversy." Look at that. Where do you stand in the matter of comfort and convenience? Not important, but according to MLK, where you stand at a time of challenge and controversy, that's what's important. Now, Representative John Lewis never ran from a challenge. He never ran from a controversy, but he confronted injustice and intolerance wherever he found it. His life is a record of bravery, of humility, compassion, boldness, and strength. My favorite quote, he said, "Do not get lost in despair." This is John Lewis. He said, "Do not get lost in a sea of despair. Be hopeful, be optimistic. Our struggle is not the struggle of a day, a week, a month, or a year. It is the struggle of a lifetime." And here it comes, folks. Never, ever be afraid to make some noise and get in some good trouble, necessary trouble. So the broad outlines, I think probably by now you know them. He was the son of sharecroppers. His family called him the preacher because he used to give eulogies when he was growing up for birds that had fallen out of trees. He grew up alternating between school and picking cotton and peanuts. In 1958, he had just turned 18 when he wrote to his hero, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, about his aspirations for moral leadership. King reciprocated with a bus ticket to visit him in Atlanta. His first arrest came in 1960 at the lunch counter sit-ins in Nashville. By the way, that was the week after the lunch counter sit-ins here in Greensboro. In 1961, he was among the original 13 Freedom Riders, black and white, who challenged the unrepentant heart of the Jim Crow South to integrate bus travel. He was the founder of SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. He was the youth organizer of 1963 for the March on Washington, wherein Martin Luther King gave the famous "I Have a Dream" speech. But listen to this, I dug this out, and I think it's interesting. I wondered, what did John Lewis say on the March on Washington? And I found his speech, and listen to this paragraph from it. This is what he says, quote, "By the force of our demands, our determination, and our numbers, we shall splinter the segregated South into 1,000 pieces and will put them together in the image of God and democracy. We must say, wake up, America, wake up, for we cannot stop, and we will not, and cannot be patient." And then we come to the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma, Alabama in 1965. There are television images of his brutalization by state troopers. This is the first of 3 Selma marches. Galvanized, these images of him being hit on the head as he was lying on the ground with a billy club. But these images galvanized the horrified nation behind the passage of the Voting Rights Act that ultimately transformed the South. By the way, that act was written in the conference room of the Religious Action Center of Reform Judaism in Washington, D.C. He was elected to Congress in 1986. He served for over 3 decades as the conscience of Congress. He had great relationships with the Jewish community. In his autobiography, he wrote, quote, the following, quote, "I've always felt an affinity with the Jewish community. Growing up in rural Troy, Alabama, I heard so many white people pronounce the word Jew in the same way that they used the N-word. They would spit the word out like a bad piece of food. I grew up studying Bible stories about the Jewish people. I felt a kinship with the children of Israel. I could see that their struggle was remarkably similar to ours. In 1996, this is interesting. Despite sharing many of the goals of that year's Million March, Congressman Lewis refused to attend because his motivation was my conscience and not my complexion. He could not endorse the leadership of the march organizer and longtime anti-Semitic bigot, Louis Farrakhan. He said the following, quote, "I cannot overlook past statements by Louis Farrakhan and others associated with the Nation of Islam, which are divisive and bigoted. And although its general goal of encouraging African-American men to be responsible is sound, the march is faithfully undermined by its chief sponsor." John Lewis helped to found the Atlanta Black Jewish Coalition in 1982. He spoke, listen to this, Andy, you were there. I don't know if you remember it, because I was in Israel at the time, but John Lewis spoke in the 1987, that gigantic rally in support of Soviet Jewry in Washington, D.C. He said it that. He said, our message, the message of the Black community is one that is very simple. We are saying to President Reagan, Mr. President, tell Mr. Gorbachev to open the doors, open the gates and let the people out. I said that as long as one Jew is denied the right to immigrate, as long as one Jew is denied the right to be Jewish in the Soviet Union, we are all Jews in the Soviet Union. In 2019, there was a caucus founded called the Congressional Black Jewish Caucus. He was the founding member. And he did that because he understood the importance of solidifying the historical relationships between these two groups of people. His awards from the Jewish community included the ADL Lifetime Achievement Award. From the American Jewish Congress Committee, he got the Selling Distinguished Service Award, the Congressional Leadership Award, and the American Liberties Medallion. For the Jewish Council from Public Affairs, he received the Tikkun Olam Award. From the Holocaust Museum in Washington, they gave him their highest honor, the Elie Wiesel Award, quote, in recognition of his extraordinary moral and physical courage and his enduring commitment to promoting the human dignity of all people. The Simon Wiesenthal Center gave him the International Leadership Award. So now a few personal comments. In 2014, I was nominated by then Senator Kay Hagan, of blessed memory, to go on the Faith and Politics pilgrimage that was organized by the Faith and Politics Institute. The person who led that pilgrimage year after year was none other than Representative John Lewis. He was the leader of that pilgrimage. I think he must have gone on 5 of them, starting in Memphis, going to Jackson, Mississippi, and ending up on the anniversary of Bloody Sunday, or the near anniversary of Bloody Sunday, in a Sunday in the month of March. So I was lucky. I was on the bus with him. I had a lot of conversations with him. I wanted to learn from him. But the thing that I remember the most on that first day that I was on the bus with him was that we went to the home of Medgar Evers. The Medgar Evers in Jackson, Mississippi, he was the American civil rights activist, veteran of World War II. He worked to overturn segregation at the University of Mississippi. He was assassinated in his carport by a man by the name of Byron Della Beckwith, a member of the White Citizens Council in Jackson, Mississippi. By the way, those of you who are not from the South should know that the White Citizens Council is just a cultured, genteel name for the KKK. And then there were 2 all-white juries that failed to reach verdict in the 2 trials of Beckwith. These trials took place in the 1960s. But in 1964, he was convicted in a new state trial based on new evidence. So we went into that house. And in the living room, we met with Medgar Evers' widow, Myrlie Evers. She actually was a noted activist in her own right. She served as the national chair of the NAACP. And Lewis spoke with us outside of the house underneath the carport in the exact place wherein Medgar Evers had been assassinated. I want to show you a picture of what was happening there, okay? So here is the carport, okay? Those that you might recognize, some of the people. Over on the right is John Conyers. Behind him, to his left, over his left shoulder, is Senator Tim Kaine, who actually ran for vice president with Hillary Clinton. There is the rabbi from Greensboro. And then to my left, you can see Juan Williams of Fox News. There were lots of people. This fellow over on the far left is a congressman. I forgot his name, but he was speaking to all of us at that particular time underneath there. And then after that, Yassia Barnwell, who had been a singer in a gospel group called Sweet Honey in the Rock, sang there and led us in song. What an experience it was to hear John Lewis at that time, and then to have that followed by such amazing music. And after we finished, I said, Representative Lewis, can I take a picture with you in front of Medgar Evers' house? Actually, it's in the back, and that's us. That's the Medgar Evers' house, and he was very gracious and allowed me to take a picture of it. And I cherish this picture. I really do. It's on the wall in our outside of my office. Okay, now this is an interesting picture. Okay, because after that was Saturday, and on Sunday we traveled to this Edmund Pettus bridge. Well, actually, we went to a church, and there we heard people speak. And we went to the Edmund Pettus Bridge. Now, this is the bridge, and this picture here is from the first of the three marches during the month of March of 1965. And this is right before he got beaten with an inch of his life. And that coat, I want you to remember that he had on this trench coat because later on I'm going to ask him about it, and you'll hear what he had to say. Okay, now here he is on the third march. Okay, now this march, you can see Martin Luther King over towards the center right. There's a pastor after him, and then to the right of the pastor is Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel. Okay, and by the way, there's another rabbi in this picture. The second guy on the left, not the guy with the collar, but with the sunglasses, is Maury Davis, who was in Westchester County for a while. And then if you move over and you see the guy with the hat on, okay, and then right next to him on the right, between the guy with the hat on and the nun, is John Lewis. This is the famous third march. This is the third march where where King called for all these clergy to come down. By that time, it was 2 weeks later. Lewis, thank God, had recovered, and he came down. And this is a very iconic picture and very famous picture. And after that particular march was over, because they actually made it all the way to Montgomery. They were protected by federal troops so that the Alabama state troopers couldn't beat them up. But after that, Abraham Joshua Heschel here on the right wrote to Martin Luther King, his friends, and he said, "Thank you for inviting me. I felt as though my legs were praying." And that's a very, very famous, famous quote. But what struck me when I was with him on that particular day is that, to the best of my knowledge, and even to this day, no one ever asked him about this picture or about what he knew about King and Heschel relation. Heschel was the greatest American rabbi of the 20th century, and why their lays. Okay, you see these Hawaiian leis over here. There, how did that happen? And by the way, here is an example. This is not the year I was on the faith and politics pilgrimage that he left. This was another year. Okay, but you can see that we had pictures. I couldn't find my picture of all of us standing with him in front of the Edmund Pettus bridge. So what I want to do is tell you that as we left that morning, Jackson, Mississippi, as we left Jackson, Mississippi, we crossed into Alabama, and we did what people our age do. We stopped at a rest stop there, and I remember going into the bathroom and seeing graffiti of a Nazi swastika and a person and a gallows hanging. I couldn't believe it. There were all these bathroom stalls. I think there were 12, and this was on. Afterwards I informed the people that this anti-Semitic Nazi graffiti had been written there, and one of the women who was running, an African American woman who was running the rest stop in Alabama, said it happens every day. We have to go in and we have to take the graffiti off. And it was that experience. I have a picture of it, but I didn't want to show it tonight. But that experience just goes to show you how much what the level of hatred is and was. So then we got back on the bus, and I decided that I was going to ask John Lewis about that march and about why people had leis on and about his overcoat, whatever happened to that. But most importantly, I was going to ask him about what, if any, remembrances he had of the relationship between Martin Luther King and Abraham Joshua Heschel. To the best of my knowledge, this is the only time that he ever spoke about it. And this actually, Rabbi Gary Zola of the American Jewish at Hebrew Union College, your alma mater in Cincinnati, actually has this, and he put it in the American Jewish Archives. So I'm going to share, and we'll just take a look at this. Whoops, wrong one, looks like. I'm going to try to share the, yes, here it is, my interview, which was just so fortuitous, it's not long, with John Lewis when I asked him these questions. So I hope you enjoy it. I think it's quite historically significant. Going to Selma, Alabama to reenact the march, and I'm sitting here with Representative John Lewis, one of the true great heroes of the civil rights movement. And Representative Lewis was telling me about the successful march, which occurred, 2 weeks after Bloody Sunday. And we were looking at the picture of him and Dr. Heschel and Ralph Bunch together. So I just wanted to get kind of your feelings about that successful march and what it was like at that time.
Well, on March the 21st, 1965, this was the third attempt to walk from Selma to Montgomery. And Dr. King had requested that religious, labor, and political leaders from around the country to come. And it was so orderly and so peaceful. There were several thousand people walking. Some people said it was about 10,000 people leaving. In that line of march was Rabbi Heschel, Ralph Bunch, Martin Luther King Jr., Reverend Ralph Abernathy, and Anon from Missouri. We walked with a sense of pride and with a sense of dignity. We had the protection of the United States military. That was soldiers that were prepared to protect us on the 50 miles walk from Selma to Montgomery.
And you told me you still have that jacket from that picture?
I do not have the
Overcoat?
the trench coat that I had on. I wish I did have that trench coat. People at the Smithsonian and the Library of Congress always asking me what happened, can I locate it? I wish I did have that coat.
And you're on the far left of the picture. And no one ever knew that I know why there were leis, Hawaiian leis before. Why was that?
But a group of citizens flew all the way from Honolulu to Alabama to show their support for the marchers. Mm-hmm. And they gave us, all of us on the front line, they gave us leis to wear.
And did you have any contact around that time with Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel?
I remember not talking with him directly, but we corresponded with Rabbi Heschel and other members of the Jewish community, especially religious leaders throughout America.
When you look back at the significance of this march, what do you think is the most significant thing that occurred in the aftermath of the march?
Well, I think the attempted march on Bloody Sunday and the march that took place on March 9th and the 21st, and eventually making it to Montgomery, have changed the nation forever. There was a sense of righteous indignation because of the violence on Bloody Sunday, March 7th, and then the beating of Reverend James Reed just made the religious community, Protestant, Catholic, Jewish, to move their feet. To, pray, and then get up and move their feet, and that's what they did.
You know that after the march was over, Rabbi Heschel wrote to Dr. King and said he felt that as though his legs were praying. And he thanked him.
I remember hearing Dr. King saying what Rabbi Heschel had put in that letter. And I remember reading some of the words that Rabbi Heschel spoke. He was considered one of the great religious thinkers, and by his coming to Selma, coming to Alabama, he helped move other people to act, to speak up, to speak out. He had a tremendous influence, not just in the Jewish community, but in the American community.
So I just want to conclude by saying I am really honored to be with you here today. It's really one of the highlights of my life, and I just wanted to thank you for all that you've done for our country.
No, but thank you for being here. You're continuing the effort that others started many years ago. It's an ongoing effort to redeem the soul of America.
Amen.
Amen.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, I have to make sure that I have this turned off before something else comes on. Okay, so let me wrap this up by just with a few comments, okay? I found myself sad this week that he died. He was 80 years old. He's truly an American hero. But I also, and by the way, you know, C.T. Vivian died, and I actually met him at the inauguration of, he was a great civil rights leader from Birmingham, I believe. I met him at the inauguration of Don Siegelman, the last Democratic governor of the state of Alabama. But I found myself asking, well, what is the next step? Okay? What are our next steps? So I had three. And they're not original to me, obviously, but I think there's three things that we need to do now. Number one, and I said this a couple of weeks ago, we need to establish Juneteenth as a national holiday. And number two, we need to rename the Edmund Pettus Bridge. There was a recent article, I think just a day or so ago, or maybe it's like, I don't remember where it was. I got it a day or so ago, from in the New York Times by a woman named Carolyn Randall Williams, entitled, "You Want a Confederate Monument? My Body is a Confederate Monument." This is an African-American woman, and she mentions that her great-grandfather, Will, was raised with the knowledge that Edmund Pettus was his father. This is the same Edmund Pettus, the storied Confederate general, the grand dragon of the KKK, for whom that bloody Sunday bridge is named. In other words, that bridge is named for a disgusting white supremacist and racist. It's time to change that name. And some people have already talked about the name that it needs to be changed to is John Lewis. And finally, folks, we got to fix the Voting Rights Act. This is what John Lewis fought tirelessly for. The Voting Rights Act was gutted by the Supreme Court in 2013. Today, voter suppression tactics like restrictive ID laws, partisan gerrymandering pose huge barriers to the ballot box and effectively disenfranchise voters, particularly black voters. You know, up until, I think, 2016, North Carolina was known as ground zero of voter suppression. That was between 2013 and 2016 because they were doing everything to suppress the vote. And that included, by the way, if you live in, those of you who live in Greensboro, taking North Carolina A&T's campus and dividing it down the middle so that the African-American kids there, of which I think there's 15,000, could not vote as a block. So they put part of it in the 6th district down the middle of a campus and the other part of it in the 13th district, congressional district. So recently, Democrats have advanced a measure through the House that would right those wrongs by restoring the Voting Rights Act. That would implement automatic voter registration. It would expand voting by mail. And guess what? They want to name it, the act, the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act. View it as a supplement for the Voting Rights Act. The Voting Rights Act, of course, had prohibited any behavior determined by the federal government to be a denial or an abridgment of the right of any citizen to vote on account of race or color. My dear friends, this act right now is sitting on Mitch McConnell's desk. It should be passed. It should be passed soon and speedily. So those are the three things: Juneteenth, rename the bridge, pass the Voting Rights Advancement Act. So the bottom line tonight is that when I think about this man that I was fortunate to spend 2 days with, this giant of American history, it occurs to me that he had a long record of fighting any ism in American society. That any ism was racism and anti-Semitism, but also xenophobia and homophobia. He was an exceptionally good friend of the Jewish people. And I believe I was blessed by God to spend 2 days with him and to learn from him and to march over the Edmund Pettus Bridge with him. Friends, a great man has passed from our midst. He was a man who embodied what the prophet Micah said when he said, "He has showed you what is good and what the Lord does require of you, only to do justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God." That was John Robert Lewis. That was Representative John Lewis. Zichrono livracha, may his memory be a blessing as well as a challenge to us, now and always, and together let us say, Amen. Shabbat Shalom.